Welcome back. Now, families in Mthatha in the Eastern Cape have begun identifying bodies of their loved ones who have died on a result of flooding. Heavy rains triggered localized floods, destroying homes and structures and claiming more than 70 lives. On Tuesday, emergency servants intensified their efforts after a minibus carrying 13 children was swept away on the R61. Now, this brings in the conversation what we see happening in the Eastern Cape to the question of the climate change that continues to affect many of our societies, especially within the rural areas where structures and many other aspects of infrastructure seems to be at its weakest 31 years into democracy. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome the interim executive director of Oxfam South Africa, Nkateko Chauke. Nkateko, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Faraz, and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure. I think, Nkateko, when we look at what has happened, I think, again, it's the rural areas that always bear the brunt. You see the floods happening there. You see the destruction that is there. And it's quite painful that 31 years into democracy, we're still having discussions as to why. Why is it when we have these heavy rainfalls, it's the rural areas that bear the brunt?
It's such a sad moment for us, and I want to start off by pledging our solidarity as Oxfam South Africa with the communities who have experienced such devastation. And for me, it's essentially the aspect that we can always be prepared. We can always, put in place measures that help us respond quickly, but we continue to be failed by systems that are not responding to the needs of communities. So even in my personal state right now, I'm not feeling so well. Particularly because of the issues that we have been responding to affecting many lives, but most importantly, women and children as well.
Nkateko, government, and I'm talking both national and provincial. Okay, so we had President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, visiting many of the victims of these floods. We, of course, had Eastern Cape Premier Oscar Mabuyane going ahead and visiting these places. But when you speak to the residents, now this happens, of course, pre-elections, post-elections, a lot of it is talk shops. What they're asking for is for there to be money from Treasury, from municipalities to assist them in times like this. And it just feels that they are being let down time and time again. National government, local government, they have to step up, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I'm sure you have been following our presence on media, as well as our statement that was released yesterday. Is we're saying that what we're seeing right now as government efforts is absolutely not enough. We need dedicated planning that involves communities as well, in terms of the contingency plans that are put in place, as well as the anticipatory response actions that are put in place need to be informed by communities. So where we are sitting now is we're seeing delayed reaction. We're also on the ground in the Eastern Cape, working with our partners, working with our teams who are getting real-time updates and information from communities in terms of the kind of miscomings that communities are experiencing right now. While we have the state as the duty bearer to respond to these issues, it is important for us to also highlight that communities are actually a key stakeholder in planning processes. And so understanding that we need to build the capacity of communities as first-line responders becomes a critical aspect of improving our climate response actions, but improving also the capacity of the government to make sure that information reaches communities well in advance. I also want to tackle this concept around the digital divide that we have. We have communication coming through the weather services informing the country of developments, etc. But that information is not trickling down to communities. I'm emphasizing as well that with organs such as ourselves based in country, the government is not leveraging and tapping into our expertise and presence to facilitate the kind of information that needs to get to communities. So we are players who are also equally interested in engaging the government in understanding where can we close the gaps in communication, how do we facilitate entry and access to information for communities, given key aspects, like I mentioned, with the digital divide, but also the lack of integration in planning of communities who are most affected. Communities are first line responders. They do have solutions, mostly indigenous solutions that respond to such instances, but are not given the time of day to inform planning processes. And hence the result becomes the situation that we are dealing with right now. One example I want to cite on this, Faraz, is we have communities put up in shelters as we speak right now, but the kind of accommodations that are made for them are not adequate to address the numbers and troves in which the communities are coming in. And so really engaging with partners such as ourselves who really have access to communities and can have processes in place to make sure that we prepare communities as first-line responders can help us in responding quite timelessly to these situations. A government visit and a PR engagement is simply just not enough for us.
Yeah, Nkateko, and that's what, a lot of the opposition within the National Assembly, of course, would say, well, this is another PR exercise from government and presidency. But this is where the important aspect of all of this comes, education on climate change. So you can have President Cyril Ramaphosa, our Deputy President Paul Mashatile, any of the other ministers within the cabinet talking climate change at summits like COP and everywhere else. But how about assisting the people in the rural areas who maybe are not that understandable or don't really, see where climate change is affecting their communities? That's important, isn't it? The fact that without this understanding of climate change, if we have more rainfall that is happening in these rural areas, more deaths and more destruction is going to happen.
Absolutely. You mentioned an interesting point, actually, with reference to climate change negotiations that happen at the COP level. I mean, the fact that as a nation, we are in these spaces pushing our political agenda, particularly on climate change and relevant actions. The fact that we also have not confronted as a nation the key issues that we are dealing with, that we haven't really had a national conversation on what climate finance means for our context and in terms of responding to the current situation that we are faced with is quite disappointing. We have our national development plan, as well as the SDGs roadmap, which is ending actually in 5 years' time, in 2030. And it's giving us a moment to really reflect on, when we say we are setting up key priorities, what are we saying and who are we bringing to the table? So for institutions such as ourselves, particularly Oxfam South Africa, we have invested a lot of our time and energy in engaging communities to build the kind of knowledge that they need to know, particularly through popular education, breaking down key concepts around climate change, what the just transition means for communities, but also, most importantly, building community resilience to climate change impacts. And so a lot of our work, particularly in the Eastern Cape, focuses on work with small-scale farmers to build resilience and adopt practices such as agroecological practices in farming that, one, look at sustainability issues, but two, also mitigate and prepare small-scale farmers to respond and shock absorb from climate impacts. A lot of this work still needs to continue, and I cannot stress enough just how much we need to invest in building popular education for our communities, for our residents, as well as for young people in schools. One of the flagship projects that we have as Oxfam South Africa as well is really looking at how we sensitize, socialize the concept of creating a circular economy within schools through eco clubs in partnership with the city of Ekurhuleni. So these are the kinds of the initiatives that we should be beginning to engage in, partnering with relevant institutions to help us really take this information forward and socialization in communities. That, for me, Faraz, will help communities when they engage in manifesto and in electioneering processes, that they are asking the right and critical questions to government. We have the local elections coming up next year. Communities should be ready to interrogate these issues and ask the right questions.
Nkateko, interrogated, and of course we are 1.5 years, 1 year, I'm not so sure when, obviously the elections is going to happen, but we have lives that have been lost. Surely this is a wake-up call for local and national government. Nkateko, we only have about 40 seconds. I'm going to give you that time to answer this.
Yes, we do not have time. We do not have time. Time is running out. We are calling on private sector to step up to help us in closing the gap in terms of the deficit in response, the deficit in securing livelihoods for communities. Oxfam South Africa is responding to the situation in Eastern Cape. We have deployed resources, working through our partners to make sure that communities get the support that they need. Finance is important, and that's what we should be rallying our stakeholders around.
Nkateko, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you, Faraz.
That's Nkateko Chauke. She is the Interim Executive Director of Oxfam South Africa. After the break, we're going to be speaking to CAGE as they look they have already filed a second legal application calling on the UK government to have Hamas removed as a proscribed terrorist organization. I'm going to be speaking to Anas Mustafa after the break.